Well, yesterday, the Southern Baptist Convention, which, as you probably know, is the nation's largest Protestant denomination, well, they unanimously passed a resolution to both oppose the so-called gender transitions to protect vulnerable children from these harmful and permanent procedures. And this resolution notes the biblical foundation that God created humans in his image as distinctly male and female, but it also extends Christian love and compassion to those experiencing identity or body-related distress. Well, joining me now to discuss this is one of the resolution's authors, Andrew Walker. He's an associate professor of Christian ethics and apologetics at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, as well as the author of God and the Transgender Debate. Professor Walker, welcome to Washington Watch. It's an honor to have you.
Jody, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Well, listen, first off, let me just say majorly hats off to you. Thank you for your tremendous leadership in helping put this resolution together. It's got to be extremely satisfying to see the unanimous manner in which this passed. But thank you so much for your leadership. Why is this such an important resolution for the Southern Baptist Convention to publicly affirm as they did?
That's a great question. I think we're living in an extremely important moment in time where we're watching the gender ideology movement crash in real time before our very eyes. And so me and my co-author, Denny Burke, he's a colleague of mine at Southern Seminary, we actually authored the very first resolution that the SBC put forward on transgender issues back in 2014 when this issue was brand new. And we have been following this issue closely over the last 9 or more years and decided that now was the time, as we have seen the news develop, to see the number of victims who are coming out talking about how the gender ideology industry has preyed upon them, that now was the time for us to be even more clear than we had previously of speaking against this and speaking against it categorically, not just for children, not just for vulnerable individuals, but opposition across the board, because we believe that you cannot thwart or undo what the nature and the image that God has placed upon us.
Absolutely. Well, I've got the resolution here. I've gone over it, and I just must say you and Denny did a spectacular job putting it together. When you're putting together something like this, what are some of the most important things that you are thinking needs to be considered in a resolution when you're trying to craft the language like this? What was the outcome that you were shooting for?
That's a great question. We first and foremost are striving to be biblical. So we're wanting to assess this from a biblical worldview and understanding the scripture sufficiency to speak to this issue. And then we have to go about the issue of fact finding and fact gathering and figuring out all of the complexities and the various constitutive elements that we need to speak to this. And then we also need to speak to not just the head, but to the heart as well, because Denny Burke and I do speak against this ideology at the level of kind of almost an academic argument in many ways, but we're trying to rely on theological arguments. And we're trying to rely on theological arguments that both, one, support the truth of who we are as male and female, but also to expose the sham ideology behind those who are perpetrating this. But then third, and this is arguably perhaps the most important, is to show the pathway of the gospel and how the gospel applies in this situation, that individuals who have gone down this path, the gospel is for them. Those who are involved in practices that are sweeping individuals into this ideology, the gospel is for them as well. And so we want to be very clear that the Bible does speak to this issue as far as opposing it, but it also speaks a word of hope as well, that the gospel is not just, it's not a message of condemnation. We do speak to the issue. It's also a message of hope and love. And I think that's one of the best things that we have to share in this moment, and particularly in this month of June, that's so-called Pride Month that we hear called all the time.
Well, absolutely, and that's one thing I was so impressed in reading over this is the truth that is clearly presented in great, meaningful, heartfelt compassion and love. And it really is a truth. And it is that gospel message that is transformational for those that need it so much. Let me ask you this. I know our time is rapidly getting past us here, but it seems like so many other denominations have drifted, and some seem to have even sprinted to go to the left on this issue. How significant would you describe it that the Southern Baptist Convention is going against that drift and swimming upstream culturally right now?
I think it's incredibly encouraging that we understand that we are to live. One of the phrases we often hear is contra mundo, pro mundo, against the world, but for the world. And I think that that's the message that we're having to embody more and more. And I think it's very important for us to go on record with this because, as you mentioned, we are the largest Protestant denomination, and in many ways we are interpreted as a bellwether for how other broadly evangelical institutions and denominations are handling this issue. And so I think it's a very meaningful statement that in a time where we're seeing Christian figures, Christian colleges, Christian institutions, maybe not necessarily vocally surrender on the issue, but they just remain silent on the issue. My co-author and I, Denny Burke, we wanted to speak clearly on this issue because we think that it's actually when times are the most challenging that the church does its best work. And so we're hopeful that, like in times past, where the culture or where a refining moment has hit upon the church has been forced to be clear, to articulate what it believes, and to do so proudly.
Our time's almost out. Where can people go see this? Where can people find it real quickly?
Yeah, it should be available on the SBC's website very soon. I would maybe give it to the end of the week for this to be placed on the website, but it's just sbc.com, I believe.
Professor Andrew Walker, thank you so much for joining us on Washington Watch.